simply put, not that we have crystal balls, but do you think,
it's a death trap.
You think people are going to die?
Yes, absolutely, people are going to die. This is a very cynical way of looking at it, but a swamp is the perfect place to dispose of bodies.
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup.
This is Ashley with Status Coup.
On the ground.
In Philadelphia.
Flint, Michigan. East Palestine, Ohio. Please support the leading independent news outlet on the ground.
Covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Very happy to be joined by Rebecca Jones. Rebecca Jones was working for Florida's government during the height of the COVID pandemic as a scientist, specifically data collection. When she unfortunately was railroaded, she had to become a whistleblower. We could talk about that a little bit later because they were manipulating data and concealing the true nature of deaths. This led to you being targeted by the DeSantis government. So there was, this was in the media. You were surveilled. They sent folks with guns to your home. So you've definitely experienced a lot. I'm sorry for that. But you're also a climatologist, a hurricane expert, and I couldn't think of anyone better. You're currently climate and ocean science advisor for Project Zero, which is UN-backed. You worked disaster response for the state of Florida for 2 years. Also was Louisiana's hurricane climatologist and a PhD in climate change and hurricanes. So I don't have any of those, but I do have common sense. And I'm pretty sure putting a outdoor tent prison in the middle of the hurricane bullseye in the Everglades is very unsafe and potentially might cause death. We've been on the ground covering so-called Alligator Alcatraz, but from what we know, it was built in about a week. There's very little transparency other than right-wing podcasters giving PR tours inside. Democrat politicians were blocked from entering. There have been reports so far, which I'll get into later, of one meal a day, maggots in detainees' foods, alternating between extremely cold temperatures to extremely hot, light on 24/7, lack of ability to shower. There's more, but I want to focus on the hurricane threat. I went to school down there. My memory is it's really bad. The worst of it kind of mid-August to September. So we're about a month out from the worst of the hurricanes, but we already saw flooding with about 1.5 inches of rain inside on day one of this camp. Can you talk about just your knowledge of this area, the record storms that have passed, and is it possible that this could be safe in the event of hurricanes?
Absolutely not. There is no world in which makeshift tents or even temporary trailer setups would be able to withstand even a tropical storm. So there's wind ratings for every housing structure that's built in South Florida, and South Florida is at the highest risk, which means that any habitat that's built is supposed to be able to withstand, 110-mile-per-hour winds. I spent the morning scouring the state's contract sites to see who they bought these trailers from to check the wind rating. But of course, for some reason, none of this information is available in the state's contract sites. And I'm sure if you put in a public records request, you get an answer in 3 years. But even trailers in South Florida are extremely dangerous places to be, even ones that are wind graded, if you have anything over 30 miles per hour. And, it's not even a tropical storm until it's much stronger than that. So a severe thunderstorm in this area is potentially deadly, much less anything bigger than that.
And I want to show this was day one. From what I heard, it was about 1.5 inches of rain. And you could see right there. I'll just play it here. I mean, that's just a little tiny kind of, afternoon rain, probably.
Yeah.
There's
And
electrical.
it's subtropics. I'm glad you mentioned that, because the thing I see every time I see that video is all of the electrical cords in the water. Are these people so daft that they don't know that water and electricity should not be mixed? because that is extremely hazardous. Like if that is the setup where they have wires running along the ground and there's flooding, you could kill people just with an average thunderstorm if you are not smart enough to pick up the wires off the ground. But the Everglades are a catchment. That's where water wants to go. That's why it's this swampy kind of transition to marshy environment. So everything there, and I checked this earlier today, is at about at ground level, because that is where water wants to be. And so it's going to stay there until either it evaporates or they sweep it out. I don't even know how they would manage that kind of a situation with such little rain causing, already standing water on the ground.
We saw with an inch and a half of rain, those cords were out. I mean, I don't know how they constructed this. I'm assuming there's probably wires, openly outside the walls and et cetera. But could you potentially have like serious fires on top of flooding in a hurricane?
Well, if they keep the wires in the water like that, you're going to have a whole lot of problems. There's a potential for all kinds of other risks too. Fire in a tent turns into an inferno pretty quickly, depending on, what the fabric is made out of. It's not really clear who is being kept in trailers or how that decision is being made, or if those are just for staff, which was the initial report when they did the first tour. But the way that it's set up now from some of the drone imagery I've seen, it looks like they're individual cells. So maybe that's for people who are about to die. I don't know. But every possible environmental risk that you can imagine, short of earthquakes, is possible in this environment. Simply
put, not that we have crystal balls, but do you think,
it's a death trap.
You think people are going to die?
Yes, absolutely. People are going to die. And there's no guarantee that anybody will tell us.
Could be why, as you said, the Trump administration, other than trying to sell the merch, is kind of moving back on this, seeing the writing on the wall.
DeSantis he plans. He saw, the desire for Trump to reopen Alcatraz, which blew up immediately because everyone's like, do you have any idea how much money it would cost to actually open? There's a reason why we shut it down in the first place. And DeSantis is always plotting, and his relationship with Trump is very icy. So he thought something, he'd throw him a bone, call it that. I guarantee that was part of the initial thought process of that. But I don't think Trump would care if people were dying. He would just say they were rapists and murderers and criminals, even though we know that less than 8% of the more than 100,000 people who have been taken by ICE actually have violent criminal convictions on their record. 8%. And so that's not going to be true either. But this is a very cynical way of looking at it, but a swamp is the perfect place to dispose of bodies. And it's not just alligators. Alligators are probably actually the least of your concern. They're relatively docile unless you're like messing with them specifically. They're unlikely to engage you. The bigger they are, the more they've learned to run away from large objects. Right. But it's the actual biochemistry of a swamp that will break a body down very quickly. And that's terrifying.
And, not that you're an OSHA worker or an OSHA expert, but there are things as building codes. You have to offer plans if you're trying to change the purpose of a structure. This is originally, in the history was, they were trying to make this the country's biggest airport. Now it's just been kind of like a pilot training center. But my knowledge is they would have had to propose to shift the purpose of this to a detainee camp. You can't do that in 8 days. Usually you have to go through kind of some red tape to do that. So could you kind of talk about, it's not even clear they have a septic system, full plumbing. There's been reports that toilets aren't flushing. So if this was put together in 8 days, how can it be equipped? Forget a hurricane for the environment, period.
Yeah, so Florida is not an OSHA state. Our federal government, for some reason, decided to allow states to opt out of participating in OSHA. They still have some regulatory bodies about things that are especially federal infrastructure, but this would be mostly state agencies overseeing this. And we know from the history of Ron DeSantis that if he wants something done, the state agency that he wants to do it is going to approve it. So he can skip as many requirements as possible, like not advertising for materials needed for this site, or not posting the contracts that were awarded publicly, which there's supposed to be a whole process for that. And so if it was a federal facility, yeah, absolutely, there would have to be some kind of oversight, you would think. But then it just goes to Trump's administration, which has noticeably stepped back in the last, after the first initial launch of this site. I think it's because we publicly renamed it Alligator Auschwitz, and it started to have some very negative imagery about it, and they didn't want the flag for that. Plus, Trump hates DeSantis, so he would throw him under the bus just to enjoy watching him get run over.
And I think it's relevant. Obviously, we see the tragedy going on in Texas, which I think was pretty obvious that this could happen. There's reports that there were lack of warning signals to particular areas that got hit hard. In this case, I mean, we're kind of like a month out from the worst of hurricane season, but storms are coming, rapid fire. It could come a little bit earlier. So you could potentially see worse than Texas. And from what I could tell, there's no actual evacuation plan here. I don't know how many detainees they're going to have. Right now, it seems to be 400 to 500, but they're talking about up to 3,000. How they would get them out quickly, where they would bring them. I just want to show you the head of Florida's emergency management, kind of like Florida's FEMA, kind of gave a bumper sticker answer to their plan. I'd love your thoughts.
A lot of people are talking about how these quickly built detention facilities could withstand a tropical system like a hurricane. Well, yesterday, during a roundtable at what government leaders call Alligator Alcatraz in the Everglades, the director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management actually spoke about that.
Contingencies, as with all state correctional facilities, we have a hurricane plan. We will not wait for a Cat 2. We will follow our normal evacuation procedures as we do for any other facility statewide in our great state of Florida. We have on-site fire and EMS resources so that we do not we don't burden the locals with any type of response.
And Kevin Guthrie also said the facility has an aluminum frame structure that's rated for winds for 110 miles per hour, which is a high-end Category 2 hurricane, and they also have backup generators.
I'm no expert. Sounds like a bunch of bullshit to me.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the wind rating is a Wind 3 standard rating, which means it's 110 miles per hour. But there is no aluminum tent that is wind graded for 110 miles per hour. There are very few trailers that, like actual structural trailers, which are grounded, that are rated for 110 miles per hour. And they're not in a Cat 2 or Cat 3 evacuation zone. They're in an A evacuation zone, which is the highest risk level for an evacuation that exists. It goes like A down to F. Part of the land is in D, but part of it is in A, right up to the highway. There's one road in, one road out. I mean, if you're talking about they're expanding to 5,000 people, I mean, you would need at least 100 buses to get all of the just detainees out of there, much less all the support staff and everybody else that they're claiming to have. And I'm kind of surprised to see Kevin Guthrie, who I used to work with, kind of parroting these lies because he knows this is not true. But he's also still working for the state, which means he's made certain concessions.
Gotcha. So for the layman, A to D, this is in the most at-risk area for the worst type of hurricane. And there's one road in and out, meaning if they have to evacuate thousands of prisoners on one road, you're also dealing with potentially residents who are trying to leave. And
I don't think that will be as much of a problem just because this area is in the middle of the Everglades. It's in the middle of nowhere. Not saying it won't be a problem for some, but that won't be the main problem. The main problem will be is that when these storms start to approach, flooding already begins. By the time the Hurricane I gets onto landfall, if it's a large enough storm, it has already been raining for 12 or 15 hours. If at any point that one road becomes impassable because of flooding, then no one can get out. And, we saw a real failure under Jared Moskowitz when there was a prison right next to several basically chemical dumps that they had put into Carson limestone, which was just brilliant. And there was a risk of massive flooding, a massive wave. And they were just like, just go to the second floor. as if that was an acceptable plan for that. But yeah, no, this is not wind rated to 110. They're in a wind zone where it should be rated to 110. But aluminum is not even remotely close to being one of the strongest metal materials that you could possibly make something out of. That is almost one of the worst materials that you can make something out of to withstand winds. I mean, this is in addition to like the heat. You're talking about peak hurricane season is pretty much the first week of September. And it's going to be 95, 100 degrees outside. And there's going to be all of these other health issues ongoing with this because the incredibly inhumane close quarters in this facility are going to become disease petri dishes throughout the next few months. And I highly doubt they're bringing in doctors to vaccinate everybody because the state seems to have a problem with vaccinations in general. And they deny that COVID ever existed now at this point. So, I mean, this is inhumane. And I mean, we really need to stop giving it to this credence of the Alligator Alcatraz because they want to make it cool and sell merch. We need to actually call it out for what it is. And it's a concentration camp with, cruel and inhumane treatment.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up. The mosquitoes, there's other things flying around, but mosquitoes obviously can carry disease. Just our reporter on the ground, our cameraman was eaten up and they're not in the detention zone. But can you talk about the risk of disease, lack of, it doesn't seem like they have a full medical unit there. By reports, they brought one detainee to a hospital for about an hour or two and then brought them back. We don't know what for. So people could potentially die before a tropical storm or hurricane.
And because there's no transparency whatsoever as to how exactly this is staffed, how exactly it's laid out, who is going to be put where, we don't know if there's like a medic on call, a ambulance on call, or whether or not there's a whole team of doctors. Because if you've got 500 people in the heat, because this is a tent, it's not even a fully enclosed tent. You can see the gaps where it attaches to the aluminum piping. Because of the heat alone, they're going to have multiple instances of heat exhaustion. They're going to have people having heart attacks because of the heat stress. They're going to have diseases or, chronic diseases that people already have exacerbated by that extreme environment. You compound that with the risk of all of the mosquito-borne illnesses that Florida has, and that far south, they have quite a bit. And you're going to need full healthcare teams 24/7. This is, one person's already been hospitalized. And if it wasn't because of the heat, it's probably because of a complication or stress. And these people are being kept in some of the most, it looks like Auschwitz. It really does look like the pictures of Auschwitz. And, that didn't start out as an extermination camp either. And so it's really horrific to see what they're doing and not be able to have any answers or clarity about what is exactly going on there.
And let me read for the Miami Herald. They spoke with the wives of some of the detainees to get some idea about what's going on in there. But specifically on the heat, a Guatemalan detainee told his wife that he was unable to sleep Monday night due to how cold it was inside the tent. By Tuesday afternoon, the same man told his wife that it appeared the air conditioner had stopped working and that it was really hot inside, according to a recording of the conversation. His wife told the Herald he was detained while he was a passenger during a traffic stop. The Venezuelan man's wife heard the same thing on Tuesday afternoon. Her husband said the air is hot inside the tent. She said he sounded out of breath. It was 96 degrees near Alligator Alcatraz Tuesday afternoon, with a feels like temperature of 105 degrees. That's in the beginning of July. Yeah. So with the heat index and all that, you could be going 105, 110 by the time of hurricanes. Like you said, heart attack, fainting or worse, or the heat could exacerbate other conditions detainees have.
Yeah. And that's not really something that's accounted for when we talk about just heat exhaustion, because we think of elderly people as being the most vulnerable. And we have very few demographics about any of the people being kept here either, which doesn't help. But if, you have any kind of chronic disease, especially one related to your cardiovascular system, the heat stress can kill you. And it's so on brand for Florida. All of this is very on brand for Florida. And at the same time, still shocking in its total depravity.